वेद्यं प्रत्यक्परं मह तदेवाहं न मत्तोऽन्यत् इति मे निश्चिता मतिः. So we were seeing तस्य हि अधिष्ठानं साक्षि चैतन्यं तज्ज्ञानमन्त्रात् तत्र कल्पितसर्पज्ञानं न निवर्त्येते इति चेत्. So without the knowledge of the adhisthana sakshi chaitanya, the kalpita sarpajnana cannot be removed. Sarpajnana, the knowledge of the snake is also illusory. That is what is the conclusion. Then 155, we are answering that doubt. What did we say in 155? Sakshi jnanam antarapi sarpajnanam nivarteti samadhanam. So the opponent wants us to believe that we need to have the knowledge of the witness principle to get rid of the snake. We need to have the knowledge of the witness principle to get rid of the snake. But really, do we need to know the knowledge of the witness principle to get rid of the snake, which you have superimposed on the rope? No. Because like we saw in the morning, the existence and the absence and the rope and the snake, they are all witnessed by the conscious witness, Sakshi Chaitanya, the witness consciousness. So everything is witnessed by, everything is perceived by the witness consciousness. Nothing misses it. Okay, so he says, Sakshi, without the answer to that is you need to have knowledge of the, because the who is the superimposer, who is the perceiver of the superimposition? Sakshi Chaitanya. So the opponent is logical. You need to have this knowledge to understand that knowledge. So for that he says, no, we don't need to have the knowledge of the witness consciousness. Even without the knowledge of witness consciousness, we can get rid of the superimposed snake. That is what is the answer. So how? Atrapi uchite, we answer this. We did this already, but I'm revisiting the same topic. But before revisiting this topic, what are we discussing here? The whole point we are discussing here is how did the snake come there? That is the whole topic. Somebody says, no, whatever you see internally, that is what is seen externally. Some other fellow says, no, somewhere you saw the snakes, that is superimposed here, crossing the time-space limits. Now, we as Vedantins are negating all that and we are trying to establish what is the nature of snake. Why do we at all have to discuss about the snake? What is your problem? For that, we say snake is just an implication, just a pointer. If you understand the rope snake idea, then you will understand the self world idea. Like the rope, the self is the substratum. Like the snake, the world is superimposed. So to understand that, we need to understand this. That is the exemplified relationship. So he says, okay, even without the witness principle, we can get rid of the snake. How? So getting rid of something is of two types. So he says, nivrittir dvidha. Negation is of two types. Atyantik nivritti karanatmana avasthiti rupa nivrittischa. Absolute negation and negation where only the causal state remains. There are two kinds of negation. One is negation absolute. The other is a negation of the effects, leaving the cause out. We have seen these with two different words, Badha and Nivritti. We said Badha and Nivritti. Nasha, destruction, is of two types. One is Badha, the other is Nivritti. Badha means a destruction of the effect along with its cause. Nivritti means a destruction only of the effect. When you break the pot, you destroy only the pot, leaving the clay, the cause. you don't destroy the clay remains. But when you destroy the cause and effect, like when you remove the ignorance, nothing remains. So that is what he says. Swakarane sahaiva karyasya nivritti atyantika nivritti nityochyate. Along with the cause, when the effect is negated, that is what is called as absolute negation. Kalpita vastunam sarvesham. Where do you see this? Kalpita vastunam sarvesham karanam tu tadhisthana chaitanyashirta avarka ajnanam eva. So wherever we have the superimposition, wherever we have superimposition, in all those places for the superimposed object, the cause is the substratum, the consciousness of substratum consciousness. So, and whatever, and what is the cause for the superimposition? It is not the substratum. It is not the substratum. It is not anything else, but the ignorance which wields the substratum is the cause. Adhisthana chaitanya ashrita tat avarka ajnanam eva. Ajnanam, ignorance. What is that ignorance doing? Avaraka, it wields. Wields which? Wherever it resides. Ashrita, wherever it resides. Where is it residing? The substratum. So whatever superimposition, the rope snake superimposition takes place because of the ignorance wheeling the substratum, which is rope. So he says, Tasma, therefore, adhisthana chaitanya aparoksha jnanena eva ajnanam tat karyancha sarvam aropitam nishesham nivartate. So what is this absolute negation? So for that he says, therefore, adhisthana chaitanya, how do you get rid of this snake? Why did the snake appear? The snake appeared because of the ignorance of the substratum. So how to get rid of the snake? Not with stick, not with any other methodology, but only through the knowledge of the substratum. That is why he says, adhisthana chaitanya aparoksha jnanena. And that knowledge also should be immediate knowledge, not a hearsay. Not a knowledge which is received by, heard by from someone. No, it should be immediate knowledge. Immediate knowledge means you should have to experience it. Yes, I see that. So only with that knowledge, this ignorance can be removed. Tat karyancha, it is not just removing the ignorance, it removes the effect of ignorance also. Ignorance wields the substratum and it projects. There are two natures of ignorance, two activities of ignorance we saw. One is to wheel, other is to project. Avarana, vikshepa. Avarana wheels and vikshepa projects. So first the avarana wheels the snake, rope, and then the vikshepa projects the snake. So wheeling and projection are two powers of ignorance. So he says, now this ignorance along with its effect, which is projection. So the wheeling along with its projection, both the powers of ignorance, they are completely destroyed, annihilated, complete. So that is what is complete. The annihilation is what is referred to as complete destruction. Okay. So karyasya karane layarupa nivrittistu vinapi adhisthana jnanam jayata. So he said there are two kinds of negation. One is absolute negation, the other is a partial negation. See, absolute negation takes place only through the knowledge of substratum. Partial negation takes place even without the knowledge of substratum. Where have we seen that? So he says the effect merging in the cause. Effect merging in the cause. So first annihilation, complete annihilation. Here merging. The cause and effect are completely destroyed in the first one. Here the effect merges in the cause. when you destroy the pot, what happens is the pot disappears. But where does it go? It does not magically disappear. It disappears in its cost. That too, material cost, not instrumental cost. It doesn't merge in the potter. It merges in the clay. So he says, Lairupa Nivrittistu Vinapi Adhisthana Jnanam. That kind of merging can take place even without the knowledge of substratum. How? Yes, he says, Sushupto Pralayecha Sakala Padarthanam Vina Eva Adhisthana Jnanam Ajnane Swakarane Layo Bhavati. Whether it is sleep or the dissolution, whether it's sleep or dissolution, in both places, even without the knowledge of substratum, the effect merges in the cause. In sleep, you don't know that the world existed or the world exists. You don't even know that. Where did the world go? It merged in its cause. That is why it emerges from that later. Okay. Now, Swakarane Layo Bhavati. Tada Sarva Drishya Padartha Laya Hetuhu Tat Tad Bhoga Prada Karma Uparama Eva. Therefore, what do you have to do is Sarva Drishya Padartha Laya Hetuhu. Whatever is perceived here, for all of them, if you want to merge any of those objects which you perceive, the means is tat tat bhoga prada karma uparama eva. How do you get rid of the objects of the world? How do you get rid of the objects of the world? How do you merge the objects of the world? So he says tad bhoga prada karma uparama eva. To get rid of the objects of the world, the means is to get rid of the activities which produces those experiences. To get rid of the objects of the world is by getting rid of the desire for the experience, activity for the experience. Okay, so that is the way. Evam eva antarapi adhisthana sakshi jnanam sarpa jnanam nivartate. This, in this way, even without the knowledge of substratum, the knowledge of the sakshi, the superimposition gets removed. Tatra sarpajnana vishibhuta sarpa abhava eva sarpajnana nivrittehe karanam bhavati. So, okay, sarpajnana can be removed even without the knowledge of the sakshi. Yes, okay, but how do you remove the knowledge of snake or ignorance of snake? So he says, sarpajnana vishibhuta. What is the object of the knowledge of snake? Absence of snake. So he says, sarpajnana vishibhuta sarpa abhava eva sarpajnana nivrittehe karanam. To get rid of the knowledge of snake, to get rid of the knowledge of snake, the absence of snake is what is the cause. When you understand the absence of snake, only when the object exists, there can be knowledge. When there is no object, how can there be knowledge or ignorance of that object? So he says that is the cause. Itham cha rajju jnanena sarpo nivarteta tatascha sarpajnana vishibhuta sarpa bhava eva sarpajnanasya lairupa nivarto nimittam bhavati. In this way, rajju jnanena sarpo nivarteta. Through the knowledge of the rope, the ignorance or the superimposition of the snake is removed. Through the knowledge of the substratum, the superimposition is removed. Thereafter, tatascha. And because of that, what happens? Sarpajnana vishibhuta sarpa bhava eva sarpajnanasya laya rupa nivritto nimittam bhavati. Therefore, for the knowledge of the snake to merge, removing it is merging it, merging in its cause. For getting rid of the knowledge of snake, you have to have the absence of snake, which is the subject of the snake ignorance. So basically what he says is the absence of snake, the knowledge of absence of snake is what is important to get rid of the superimposition. Okay, this we saw. Now from here 156. Now there is one way, one of the methodology he explained. That is not the primary teaching. That is accepting this fellow through Vedanta we negated. What is the real way? He says, Rajju Jnana Samaye Sarpa Jnana Adhisthana Bhuta Sakshi Bhanam api Sambhavati iti Samadhanam. We don't care. We said that we don't need the knowledge of Sakshi. Now he says, Rajju Jnana Samaye, during the knowledge of the rope, Sarpa Jnana Adhisthana Bhuta Sakshi Bhanam api. When you gain the knowledge of rope, the substratum for the knowledge of snake. The substratum for the knowledge of snake. What is the substratum for the knowledge of snake? Not rope. Don't say rope. The substratum for the knowledge of snake is your Sakshi. The witness is what is superimposing and seeing that. So he says, Sakshi Bhanapi, even the knowledge of that witness takes place. When does the knowledge of witness take place? When you gain the knowledge of the substratum, rope. How? Nathava. Though that is what he is explaining. Sarpaha tad jnanam cha iti ubhayam api rajju jnaneneva nivartita. The knowledge of snake as well as the snake. The knowledge of snake as well as the snake is gotten rid only through the knowledge of the rope. The knowledge of snake as well as the snake is removed through the knowledge of rope alone. You don't need to have anything else. The knowledge of rope removes both the knowledge of snake and the snake. That is the example. The knowledge of self removes the ignorance and its projection in the world. The knowledge of self removes the ignorance and the projection, which is the world. So he says, Tatsahi. How do you say that the knowledge of rope removes both the knowledge of snake as well as the snake? He is explained. Tatsahi. Let me explain. Rajju Sakshatkara Samaye Antakaranam Netradwara Vahirnidgatya Rajju Desham Prapya Tatsamanakara Bhavati. So now he is explaining the methodology of how you understand, how you gain the knowledge of the object. We have seen this 1,000 times. You have the object. You have the object. How do you gain the knowledge of object? The mind transforms itself into thought function, travels through the sense organ, reaches the object. And then at that point of time, first thing that takes place is a removal of the wheel. When the first function, you should never forget, thought functions, functionality, activity is of two types. Like the ignorance has two activities. One is wheeling and the other is projection. Similarly, the thought functions, first activity is the only activity of thought function is to get rid of the wheeling. The thought function's activity, only activity is to get rid of the ignorance, the wheel of ignorance. That's all. The thought function starts, goes and hits. What's that smell? No. So something burning, burn smell. That's what. Yeah. Outside? Okay. So the thought functions only functionality is to get rid of the wheeling of ignorance, the wheel of ignorance. The moment the thought function goes to the object, the wheel disappears. Then what happens? The consciousness associated with the thought function illumines the object and engulfs the object and takes the form of the object. Okay, that is what he says. Rajju sakshatkara samaye antakaranam netradwara bahirnirgatya rajjudesham prapya tat samanakara bhavati. During the knowledge of immediate knowledge of the rope, what happens is the antakarana, the mind goes through the, he directly says the mind goes through the sense organ, but mind transforms itself into thought function and goes to the sense through the sense organ to the object. Okay, bahirnirgatya, going to that place, rajjudesham prapya, gaining the, it's okay. We'll talk about that. Rajju de bahirnirgatya, after going outside, Rajju desham prapya, it goes to the place where the rope is. The mind transforms into thought function, goes to the place where the rope is. Okay. Now, tat samana akara bhavati. The thought function, the mind transforms into the same form as the object, the rope. The mind transforms into the object rope. That is how we gain the knowledge of rope. So he says, Ataha, therefore, Rajju Sakshatkara Samaye, Vritti Upeda Chaitanyam, Rajju Upeda Chaitanyam Chaiti, Ubhayam Eki Bhavati. Now he is bringing the idea of Vritti. He didn't say the Vritti there. He says the mind travels through. Mind does not travel through any way. It transforms into thought function and travels through the sense object. Okay. Now, when the mind travels, mind transforming into a thought function, mind does not produce thought function. Mind transforms into thought function and travels through the sense organ and reaches the object and becomes the form of the, takes the form of the object. Okay. Now, he says, therefore, during the knowledge of the rope, object rope, what happens is the consciousness associated with the rope and the consciousness associated with the thought function. The consciousness associated with the rope and the consciousness associated with the thought function, they become one. Because what happened now? The thought function transformed itself into rope. So when you, whether you say rope associated consciousness or thought function associated consciousness, now it is not different. This is what we called as a vritti vyapti. This is what is called as vritti vyapti. Now, na tayoho asti bhedha. There is no difference between the thought function associated consciousness and the rope associated consciousness. When we say there is no difference between them, we are not talking about there is no difference between the thought function and the object. We are talking about there is no difference between the consciousness. So, atra ayam hetu. This is the reasoning here. Nahi kochidapi chaitanyasya asti bhedaha swarupataha. Wherever you see the consciousness, nowhere there is a difference between consciousness. Nowhere there is a duality of consciousness. That consciousness, this consciousness. We can say that consciousness, this consciousness, but in reality, consciousness cannot be qualified or attributed. There is only one consciousness. Samvid ekarupa na bhidyate. Tat in Panchadashi Kara repeats again and again. Samvid ekarupa na bhidyate. Samvid means knowledge. Ekarupa means one form. Na bhidyate does not differ. So knowledge is of one nature, it does not differ. That is what he says here. Nahi kochidapi chaitanyasya asti bhedaha swarupatha. In inherent nature, the consciousness does not differ. Kintu in the inherent nature, if it does not differ, does it differ somehow? Yes. We do accept the difference in consciousness. Consciousness is not yourself, right? Satchidananda, Chit, Chaitanya, consciousness. Chit Brahman, Chaitanyam Brahma, Jnanam Brahma. So how can there be difference in consciousness? Inherently, there is no difference, but when it is associated with an embodiment, there is difference. When it is associated with embodiment, then you say pot consciousness, cloth consciousness. Basically, consciousness does not differ, but there is a seeming difference when it is associated with something else. That association also seeming association. So that is what he says. Kintu upadi nibandhanaha eva saha. The duality in consciousness is because of the embodiments. How? Vritti upeta chaitanyasya rajyopeta chaitanyasya cha bheda prayojaka upadhi vritti rajyuscha. The one which differentiates the consciousness associated with rope and the consciousness associated with the thought function is what differentiates the consciousness associated with the rope and the consciousness associated with the thought function? Rope and thought function. Rope and thought function. That is what differentiates the consciousness between them. Rope differentiates itself. See, simple. When I say rope associated consciousness, I told very clearly consciousness cannot be attributed, adjectified. When I say rope associated consciousness, I am adding an adjective of rope to consciousness, rope consciousness. When I say thought function consciousness, I am adding a adjective of thought function. What is the nature of Visheshana? Adjective. Adjective is to differentiate itself from the others. Adjectives are used to differentiate oneself from the others. So when I say thought function consciousness differentiate itself from rope consciousness. When I say rope consciousness differentiates itself from the thought function consciousness. So that is why he says ya vritti rajjuscha iti upadhi dvayam vibhinna deshastham tada tad upeta chaitanyo bhedah siddhyati. But when, see, thought associated consciousness, rope associated consciousness, is there a difference? Is there a difference between them? Thought associated consciousness, rope associated consciousness. Embodiment. So there is difference. Yes. Vedanti should not blindly say yes. Because rope associated consciousness and the thought function associated consciousness do not differ if the thought function is objectifying the rope. When the thought function is objectifying the rope, the thought function has transformed itself into rope. Now, when you have the knowledge of rope, what happens? Your thought function travels through the sense organ and transforms into rope. Now they are same. But if there is rope and there is thought function somewhere, thought function associated consciousness and rope associated consciousness are different. Only when they are in different place or different time, there is duality. If they are in same place, same time, there is no duality. That is what he says. Yada vritti rajjuschaiti upadhi dvayam. Both the embodiments of rope and the thought function, both the embodiments, vibhinna shastham, if they are existing in different places, then tada tad upahita chaitanya bheda siddhyati. Then that embodiment consciousness, whatever consciousness it is embodying, that differs. Thought function associated consciousness, rope associated consciousness. When I am objectifying the rope, then the thought function becomes rope. So there is no difference in consciousness. When I'm objectifying pot, then the consciousness thought function is of the pot, and there is rope associated consciousness. They are different. The thought function associated consciousness and the rope associated consciousness are not in the same place. Therefore, they are different, seemingly different. There is a duality of consciousness. Okay? Tada yada upadyoho ekadeshastitvam bhavati tada nopita chaitanya bhedah. When the embodiment is with respect to the same place, when the embodiment is with respect to the same place, rope, thought function of rope and object rope, then the embodied consciousness does not differ. It became one with that thought function rope. Ayam artha Vedanta Paribhasha Granteshu Prasiddha. These ideas are established in Vedanta Paribhasha etc. text, and that very idea which is explained in Vedanta Paribhasha is what I explained through the thought function like rocket etc. So that is exactly what I explained through those examples. Okay, now Uktaritya, in the aforesaid form, Sarajju Sakshatkara Drashaya, Rajju Upeta Chaitanyam, Vritti Upeta Chaitanyam Cha iti, Tat Ubhayam Eki Bhavati. So in this place, when I am objectifying the rope associated consciousness and the thought associated consciousness becomes one. Okay, so tatra sakshi chaitanyam eva vritti upayita chaitanyam iti uchyate. There the consciousness, witness consciousness is what is referred to as a thought function associated consciousness. So what is he trying to say? Even during the knowledge of pot, cloth, etc., I have the knowledge of the witness principle. Sakshi knowledge is there. First, he said, we don't need Sakshi knowledge of the witness to get rid of the ignorance of snake, the superimposition of snake. Now he says, even while the knowledge of rope, the substratum rope takes place, there is knowledge of the witness principle. Because what is thought function associated consciousness? It is witness principle. How can they be that be witness principle? What is witness? What is Sakshi? Avidya, Vritti, Upahita, Chaitanya, or Avachinna Chaitanya. When I Avachinna Chaitanya, it is associated consciousness. When I say Upahita Chaitanya, it is embodied consciousness. That's all difference. So, Avidya, Vritti, embodied consciousness, or Avidya, Vritti, associated consciousness. What is the knowledge of pot, cloth, etc.? Where does the knowledge of pot, cloth, etc. take place? When does it take place? In the state of knowledge, liberation? No, in the state of ignorance. So, when I have the knowledge of pot, that means avidya vritti. Avidya vritti associated consciousness, thought function associated with the ignorance, which is embodied by consciousness, is there already. So he says, Tatra Sakshi Chaitanam, Sakshi Chaitanyam Vritti Upachaitam. Antakarane tadvirtau cha sthitvapi asangataya tayoho avbhasaka chaitanya matrasya sakshitvam abhidhanat. What do you say as Sakshi? Though we say Sakshi is the witness principle, in the beginning, when he said Sukham Nityam Swaprakasham Vyapakam Namaru Adhisthana Buddhyam Aparam Sarva Vedanta Pratyaparam Tadeva Namatto Anyaditi main Nishchitamati there, when he said about, he discussed about the Sakshi in the beginning, Sakshi Vedyam, Sakshi. There we explained Sakshi does not refer to the avidya vritti associated consciousness. There Sakshi refers to the self. When he says Sakshi in the beginning, he refers Sakshi as self, not the ignorance associated consciousness or ignorance thought function associated consciousness. So that is what he is bringing again. Antakarane tadvirtau sthita. That consciousness which exists in the mind and its transformation, the thought function, staying there means it is associated with the thought function and mind. Consciousness is associated with the thought function or mind. That means something which is associated with something else makes both of them non-eternal. Association per se leads to limitation. So he says, asangataya. Though there is association with the thought function or the mind, that association is a seeming association. It is not real association. So the consciousness, though is with the thought function, with the mind, it is not associated with it. It is not attached with it. It's not tainted by that. Therefore, Sakshi Chaitanyasya Tayor Avbhasaka Chaitanya Matrasa Sakshitva. What, how does that? See, you said thought function, associated consciousness. Rope, associated consciousness. There is association. No. What we mean by association is not really an attachment. Then what? The effulgence. When we say the light illumines the object, that does not mean the light is attached with the object. Whether the object exists or does not exist, the light is going to shine, illumine things, whatever, existence and non-existence. So similarly, here, this Chaitanya, this Sakshi Chaitanya, just illumines the existence and absence of objects. That is what is the association. And because of that, see, when I'm okay, two papers. When I bring a good paper, the light, because this is good paper, it is going to shine bright. When I'm going to use a bad paper, no, dirty paper. No, it is not going to differentiate between good and bad. Though it is associated, it is not associated. This is how. Similarly, the consciousness, though it is associated, it is as though associated, it just illumines. It gives it the existence. It gives it the existence, that's all. When you say pot exists, that existence is the self. That is the consciousness. That is the Sakshi, we say. Okay? Now, Uktaritya Rajju Sakshatkara Samaye Sakshi Chaitanya Rajju Upeta Chaitanya Cha Abheda Siddha. So, in the aforesaid manner, during the knowledge of the rope associated consciousness and thought associated consciousness, they are one. Consciousness is one. Okay? Now, Rajju Upeta Chaitanyam Cha Rajju Jnanena Avbhasate. The consciousness associated, embodied by rope. Consciousness embodied by rope. How is it illumined? Illumined by the knowledge of rope. The consciousness embodied by rope is illumined by the knowledge of rope. Rajju Pita Chaitanyad Aprakat Bhutam Sakshi Chaitanyamapi Rajju Jnanena Eva Bhavaste. So listen to this. The rope, consciousness embodied by rope is illumined by the knowledge of rope. Consciousness, we are talking about two different consciousness. Consciousness embodied by rope and consciousness embodied by witness, Vritti, thought function. consciousness embodied by rope, under the Sakshi Chaitanya, the consciousness, which is this witness principle, witness consciousness. We are talking about two consciousness. So earlier we said the knowledge of witness consciousness is not a must. Now he says the knowledge of witness consciousness also takes place. How? The knowledge of the rope, gives you the knowledge of rope embodied consciousness. Knowledge of rope gives you the knowledge of a rope embodied consciousness. Not just that, it also gives you the knowledge of witness consciousness. The knowledge of rope gives you the knowledge of a rope embodied consciousness and also the witness consciousness. For both rope embodied consciousness and witness consciousness, the only link is the knowledge of rope. So he says, Rajju jnaneneva avvaste evam Rajju sakshatkara samaye sarpajnana adhisthana bhuta sakshi chaitanyasya bhanasatvat tatra kalpita sarpajnanasyapi nivritti sambhavati. Okay. When I have the knowledge of rope, you have knowledge of two consciousness. One is the witness consciousness. The other is a rope embodied consciousness. Okay? Knowledge of rope. With the knowledge of rope, I have two knowledges. One is the consciousness associated or embodied by rope, and the consciousness of witness. Consciousness of witness and consciousness embodied by rope. How am I gaining? Through only one knowledge, the rope knowledge. Therefore, he says, in this way, Rajju Sakshatkara Samaye, during the immediate knowledge of the rope, I see the rope, the immediate knowledge of rope takes place. Then, Sarpajnana Adhisthana Bhuta Sakshi Chaitanya se Bhana Sattva. What happens when I see the rope? Then I am not seeing the rope alone. What am I seeing there? The substratum consciousness of rope. Do I see the consciousness or not when I see the rope? I do see the consciousness. Why? Because rope is. And that isness is of consciousness. Rope is inert. It does not have isness. It cannot have isness. It cannot have existence individually, independently. So, when I have the knowledge of rope, what it essentially means is I have the consciousness associated with the rope. The knowledge of consciousness associated with the rope. Because without consciousness, it cannot have existence. So, Bhanasatvat, Tatra Kalpita Sarpajnanasya Nivritti. Since I have the knowledge of the substratum consciousness, when I see the rope, I have the knowledge of the substratum consciousness. What does that mean? That means there is no superimposition possible. When you have the knowledge of substratum, where can there be superimposition of snake or whatever? The knowledge of substratum removes the superimposition. That is the basic tenet. That is what he concludes. 157. Sakala Triputi Bhana Samaye. Triputi it should be. Sakala Triputi Bhana Samaye. Sakshi Bhanam Avashyam Bhavati iti Nirupanam. Whatever object, knowledge of object takes place. There is a trinity. What trinity? The knower, the knowing, and the object of knowledge. So whenever there is this trinity of knower, knowing, and object of knowledge, wherever it is, in all those places, the knowledge of the witness, the illumination of the witness, the effulgence of the witness, the knowledge of the witness definitely takes place. How? So he is explaining. Athava. Instead of explaining it in the way which you saw, we'll explain it in a different way, he says. Different way? Who taught you this different way? So he is not stealing the knowledge. He is presenting the knowledge with the author's name. He says, Athava Kutastha Deepe Vidyaranya Munibihi Ithamuktam. In the Prakarana called Kutastha Deepa, Vidyaranya Muni is the name of the author. Vidyaranya Muni. Swami Vidyaranya Muni is the name of the author of the text Panchadashi. Panchadashi, 15 chapters. Okay. So, Panchadasha. Dasha means 10, 5. Pancha means 5. So 15. So 15 chapters. The 15 chapters are broken into 3 parts. First 5 chapters is Viveka Panchakam. First 5 is Viveka Panchakam. The second 5 is Deepa Panchakam. The final 5 is Ananda Panchakam. Viveka Panchakam, Chit. Deepa Panchakam, Sat. And Ananda. Sat, Chit, Ananda. So, in the Kutastha Deepa, 6th chapter or 7th chapter, so in that he says, Antakaranasya vritti chidabhasa sahita chakshuradi karana dwara bahir nirgatya. Antakaranasya vrittihi. Antakaranasya vritti, the thought function of the mind. Meaning, when the mind transforms into thought function, chidabhasa sahita, and it is associated with the consciousness, we said. When it is associated with the consciousness, what kind of consciousness? It is not the absolute self, it is consciousness of the reflected. Reflected consciousness is what is called as Chidabhasa. Reflected consciousness is Chidabhasa. See, I explained it through the mirror. There are 3 things. Okay. There is sunlight. I have a mirror. And there is this room. I am redirecting the light from the sun through the mirror to the room. Okay. Now, the sun alone cannot do that. The mirror alone cannot do that. So, I need to have these 3. That reflected sunlight is like the reflected consciousness. So, the sunlight, the medium of reflection, and the reflection in the sun, in the medium. These 3 are important to bring in the light to the room. Similarly, you understand, sun, mirror, and the reflection of sun in the mirror. All these 3 are necessary to illumine the object in the room, dark room. Similarly, the consciousness, mind, and the reflection of consciousness in that mind. Consciousness, avidya, and the reflection. Consciousness, ignorance, and the reflection of consciousness in that ignorance. All the 3. This group is what is called as a Jiva. When I say Jiva, I essentially refer to not just the reflected consciousness. The reflected consciousness, the medium, avidya, and the reflection. That which is reflected on the self. Self plus the consciousness plus ignorance plus reflected consciousness is what is Jiva. So he is bringing that reflected consciousness. Where is the reflection? In the vritti. the consciousness reflected in the thought function. Chakshuradi karana dwara. The consciousness reflected in the thought function. That consciousness is what we say as a thought function associated consciousness or thought function embodied consciousness. Here, instead of the ignorance reflecting the consciousness, we have the thought function reflecting the consciousness. Okay. Now, this thought function, which has the reflection of consciousness, to simplify it, thought function associated consciousness travels through the sense organ to the object externally and reaches the pot, etc. object. And at that point of time, what happens? It illumines the object. How does it illumine the object? Consciousness, which is reflected on the thought function, illumines the object. How? First, the thought function goes and removes the wheel of the object, and then the consciousness illumines it. Okay. Now, he says, Tatra ghatadi rupa vishaya. So, we have Trinity. What is the Trinity? Vishaya, the object of knowledge. What is the object of knowledge? Pot, etc. The means, the knowledge. What is that? Chidabhasa Saita Vritti Rupam Ghatadi Vishekam Jnanam. The consciousness associated with the thought function which has taken the form of pot, etc. The consciousness associated with the thought function which has taken the form of the pot, etc. That is knowledge. Knowledge means self. Knowledge means self, true. But in Panchapadika, there is a statement, Antakarana Vritto Jnanato Upacharat. We, for namesake, use the word knowledge for thought function. So, that is what he says. First, the object is a pot, etc. The knowledge is the knowledge of pot, etc., which is through the thought function associated with consciousness. Knowledge that is gained through the thought function associated with consciousness. Pot, etc. object. Knowledge is a thought function associated consciousness. And who is the knower? Chidabhasaita antakarana rupa. The mind associated with consciousness is the knower. Mind associated consciousness knower. Thought function associated consciousness is the knowledge. Object associated consciousness is the object. Pot associated, etc. is the object. Mind associated consciousness knower. Thought function associated consciousness knowledge. Pot associated consciousness object. Okay. Etatrayamapi sakshi prakasheti. So, which one does the witness illumine? Which one does the witness principle, the sakshi illumine? The knower, the means, or the object? There is no choice. The witness illumines the knower, the knowledge, as well as the object. Because witness does not differentiate. If it is differentiating, then it is not a witness. So, it illumines all the three. Asya ayam artha. This is the meaning. Ayam ghataha. When we say this is pot. Iti jnane sabhasa antakarana vritya ghata matram prakashate. When we gain the knowledge of pot, this is pot. What happens is, sabhasa antakarana vritya ghata matram prakashate. Sa abhasa antakarana vritti. The thought function along with the reflected consciousness. The thought function along with the reflected consciousness. When I say, when I have the knowledge, this is pot. What happens is, the thought function associated with the consciousness illumines the object pot. That is why he says, only the object pot. the thought function associate with the reflected consciousness, the consciousness. Thought function associate with reflected consciousness or consciousness illumines only the pot. When I have the knowledge, this is pot. Ghatam aham janami ityatratu. But when I have the knowledge and I say, I have the knowledge of pot. First is, this is pot. At that point of time, the thought function associated with the consciousness illumines only the pot. The second stage is, I have the knowledge of pot. At that point, he says, aham iti shabdasya artha yo jnata, ghata iti yo jneyah, janami iti yad ghata vishekam jnanam ityet trayamapi triputi rupam sakshi prakashyati. Beautiful. See, this is pot. What happens when I say this is pot? The thought function associated consciousness illumines the pot. When I say I have the knowledge of pot, I have the knowledge of pot, or I know pot. Simple. I know pot. I know pot. I knower. Know, knowledge. Pot, object. So when I say I know pot, all these three, knower, knowledge, as well as the object, all these three are illumined by the witness. When I say this is pot, only the object pot is illumined by the consciousness associated with the thought function. But when I say I know pot, then the knower, the knowledge, as well as the object is illumined by the witness. All the three. So, iti ghata vishekam jnaniti trayamapi triputi rupam sakshi prakashyati iti. Jnata jnanam jneyam jnanam chaiti yeta trayamapi triputi ityuchate. The knower, the knowledge, and the object. These three are referred to as triputi, trinity. Okay? Ithameva sarvatra nikhila triputi prakashaka sakshi eva. So, in this way, whatever be the object, this is, I have the knowledge of pot. Instead of that, I have the knowledge of cloth. I have the knowledge of world. I have knowledge of this. I have knowledge of that. Whatever it may be. There is I, knowledge, pot. I, knowledge, cloth. I, knowledge of world. Whatever it may be. So, in all these places of Trinity, the Trinity is illumined by witness, the self. The Trinity is illumined by witness. I exist. Knowledge exists. Pot exists. So, everywhere the common connection is existence. And existence is Sakshi. Existence is the self. So, he says, only through that witness, you understand everything. Yadi sakshi swayam ajnatah sya tada triputi jnanam na sakshina bhayata. Now, what is that which illumines all these three? Knower, knowledge, known. What is that illumines all these three? Sakshi. Sakshi is that which illumines all these three. Now, if you don't know Sakshi, let us suppose you don't know Sakshi. First, we said we don't need to have the knowledge of Sakshi, and we answered it. Now, we say the knowledge of Sakshi takes place. Now, in this point, if we don't accept the existence, the knowledge of Sakshi, what happens? Without the knowledge of Sakshi, without existence, there can be no knower, no knowledge, no known. So that is what he says. Yadi Sakshi swayam ajnata. If the Sakshi itself is not known, then the knowledge of the Triputi cannot be illumined by the Sakshi. If I don't know myself, then I cannot claim to I say, I know this, I know that. I cannot claim, I know this, I know that. Because you will ask, okay, knowing that and this is okay, but who is this I? I don't know. I don't know. You have to say, I don't know. This is a great confusion. You say, I know pot. Okay, pot? No. Okay, fine. Who is this I? Don't know. Can you say that? No. So when I say I know pot, then all these three are illumined by witness. Then you definitely have the knowledge of witness. Without the knowledge of existence of witness, you cannot say I know pot or I know cloth. So he says, तस्मात् therefore सकल त्रिपुटी ज्ञान दशायां साक्षी ज्ञानम अपि अवश्यम जायते एव. So whenever you have the knowledge of Trinity, whatever object may be the object of knowledge, there definitely you have the knowledge of witness. Okay, now Swayam Prakashatvat Sakshina. How can there be knowledge of Sakshi? I don't know Sakshi. I don't know Sakshi. I say I know pot. Yes, but where is the knowledge of witness? I, the knower, there. Knowing is there. Pot is there. But where is witness? Witness is self-effulgent. Because of the witness, which is the existence, all these three are exists. Therefore, iti abhyupeyam. This is how you have to accept. Anena cha sakshi jnanena sarpa jnana nivartita. By this sakshi jnana, by this knowledge of witness, the superimposition of a rope is removed. उक्तरीत्या सर्पादिमिथ्या विषयस्य तज्ज्ञानस्य च पृथक् एव अधिष्ठानमिति अभ्युपगम पक्षे इयन्त्या आक्षेप समाधानानि समभवत्. So why are we discussing all that? So he says uktaritya, in the aforesaid manner, sarpadi mithya vishayasya tad jnanasya cha, the rope etc. illusory objects and its knowledge, the rope etc. illusory objects and its knowledge, for both of them pruthak eva adhishthanamiti. If you accept the substratum for the rope, the snake etc., and the substratum for the knowledge of that snake etc. are different, then this is what will be, whatever we see, the opposition and the refutation. This is what is the opposition and refutation of that opposition. Okay. 158. Mithya sarpasya tad jnanasya cha adhishthanam sakshi eveti nirupanam. Now he is establishing that the illusory snake, for the illusory snake and its knowledge, substratum is not different. If you accept it to be different, then these are the opposition and the answers. But in reality, the substratum for the snake as well as its knowledge is a witness. Same. Only the witness is the substratum for the snake as well as its knowledge. We'll see this tomorrow. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamādaya Purnamevavashishyate Shanti Shanti Shanti.